I've seen two patients in the same hallway. Doors just a few steps apart. The same sharp scent of disinfectant in the air. The same steady rhythm of monitors echoing through the night. And yet, they were moving toward completely different endings. It wasn't the illness that separated them. Not their age. Not how long they had been there. It was something else. I remember one shift in particular. The kind that feels too quiet, like the whole hospital is holding its breath. I moved from room to room, adjusting 4 lines, checking vitals, fixing pillows. But each doorway carried a different weight. In the first room, the atmosphere felt lighter. Not happy, no. But there was a kind of calm you can't really explain. The lights were dim, a TV playing on mute. And there was always someone sitting by the bed. Sometimes in silence, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes just being there. With no rush to leave. When I walked in, he would look straight at me. He didn't turn away. He didn't pretend to be asleep. He asked simple questions, thanked me for small things. And more than anything, he felt present. Even in pain, even with a tired body, there was a quiet acceptance in the way he breathed. In the other room, it felt different. The lights were usually off, but not out of comfort, more like absence. Fewer visits. And when people did come, they stayed briefly, disconnected, like no one really knew what to say in that space. He avoided eye contact. Sometimes, he pretended to be asleep when I came in. Other times, he just stared at the ceiling, like he was somewhere else. Far away from that room, his hands restless, his body tense even under medication. And there was something in the air, something heavy, hard to name. There was silence there too. But not the same kind of silence. This one was full of things left unsaid. I did the exact same procedures for both of them. Same routine, same schedule, same care. On the outside, everything was identical. But underneath, it felt like I was witnessing 2 completely different stories reaching their final chapter. And it was there, in that hallway, walking from one door to the next, that I started to understand something that changed how I see all of this to this day. A person's ending almost never begins on their last day. Over time, I stopped focusing only on charts, numbers, and reports. I started paying attention to something else. Small things. Almost invisible things. Because in that hallway, the difference between those 2 patients didn't announce itself. It whispered. And you could only hear it if you slowed down. If you stayed a few extra seconds in the room, even when there was nothing clinical left to do. In the first room, there was one detail I couldn't ignore. The door. It was almost never fully closed or always slightly open, as if that space was still connected to the world outside. And every time someone walked by in the hallway, he would gently turn his head, not with anxiety, but with a quiet kind of curiosity, like someone who still feels part of things. The visits weren't loud. No big speeches. But they had presence. Sometimes it was a daughter adjusting the sheets carefully. A friend telling an old story that didn't really go anywhere. A grandchild scrolling on their phone, just sitting there so the room wouldn't feel empty. And he responded. Even when he was weaker, he would gesture, squeeze someone's hand, try to smile with his eyes. There was exchange. There was connection still happening, even at the very end. Now, in the other room, the signs were different. The door stayed closed most of the time, not because it had to be. It felt like the room had closed in with him. When people came to visit, they would pause at the doorway, like they needed a moment to gather themselves before stepping in. And once they did, time seemed to move faster. Short conversations, uncomfortable silence, eyes that didn't quite meet. There was one small moment I can't forget. I offered him water dot in the first room. Even with difficulty, he would give a small nod. Sometimes he barely drank, but he accepted it. It was like he still wanted to engage, still wanted to respond to the world dot in the other room. He hesitated dot sometimes. He refused with a slight shake of his head. Other times, no response at all, as if even the smallest interaction required an effort he no longer wanted to make. And it wasn't just physical exhaustion dot, it was something deeper dot. There was also the way each of them handled the silence at night dot in the first room. When I walked in during late rounds, he would slowly open his eyes. Sometimes whisper something, ask the time, make a simple comment. There was continuity, like time still meant something to him dot in the other. The silence felt heavier dot. He would lie still, or restless, turning side to side even under medication. And when he opened his eyes, it wasn't presence. It felt like he was trapped somewhere inside his own thoughts, somewhere no one else could reach. And that's when I understood. These small signs, the way someone accepts a glass of water, responds to a visit, looks at the door. They start telling a story long before any final goodbye, because the end doesn't arrive all at once dot, it reveals itself. In the details almost no one notices dot as the days went by. I started to understand that those signs didn't begin in that room. They came from much earlier. Long before the hospital. Long before the illness. They came from the life each of them had lived. And more importantly, from what had been left unresolved inside them dot in the first room. This showed up in small fragments throughout the day. Nothing was ever said directly. No dramatic confessions. But sometimes, in the middle of a simple conversation, pieces of a life would slip through. And it felt settled. I remember one afternoon when his daughter was sitting beside him, scrolling through old photos on her phone, trips, birthdays, ordinary moments. And he, with a fading voice, would comment quietly, "That was a good day. I almost didn't go on that trip. I'm glad I did." There was a lightness in the way he spoke. It wasn't heavy nostalgia. It wasn't hidden regret. It felt more like acknowledgement, like he was looking at his own life in a quiet way, saying, "That was it, and it's okay." There was another moment, even more subtle. He asked to be alone with his wife for a few minutes. I stepped out, leaving the door slightly closed. And when I came back, I didn't hear anything. No raised voices, no crying, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence. When I walked in, they were holding hands, both with teary eyes, but calm, as if something important had already been said, even without words dot, and that changes everything at the end dot now, in the other room. The story was different. There, the silence didn't feel like rest dot, it felt like build-up. Sometimes he would start a sentence and stop halfway, like he didn't know how to finish it, or like it was already too late to say it. There was one night he called me over. That didn't happen often. I walked closer, and he took a while to speak, staring off to the side, avoiding my face. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Do you think it's still possible?" He didn't explain, didn't say what he meant. But in that moment, I knew it wasn't about treatment dot. It was about something he hadn't done. Something he hadn't said. Someone he hadn't reached out to. I asked if he wanted me to call someone. He hesitated. Then said no. Turned his face to the wall. And that moment just stayed there dot. In the days that followed, I noticed small attempts that never fully happened. When someone visited, it felt like he wanted to say something deeper, but he pulled back, changed the subject, or went quiet dot, It was like there was a weight inside him, with nowhere to go. No space. No courage. And it showed in his body. The tension wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was unresolved life, compressed into a space that was slowly running out. That's when it became impossible not to see. The difference between those two patients wasn't in what was happening there. It was in what had, or hadn't, been lived, said, resolved. Long before that bed, one carried memories he could revisit with some peace. The other carried unanswered questions. And when the end starts getting close, those two things don't weigh the same. It was only after a few days of moving between those two rooms, walking the same hallway, hearing the same sounds, repeating the same routines, that it finally became clear to me. The difference between them wasn't in the ending. It was in how each of them had lived before getting there. Because when you reach that point, there's not much space left to build something new. The body doesn't respond the same way. Time doesn't stretch. Opportunities don't show up like they used to. What exists in that moment is return. It's as if life begins to give back, quietly, everything that was accumulated over the years. In the first room, what came back was connection. Even in the quiet moments, even in the physical struggle, you could feel there was a life built with presence. Not perfect, not flawless, but lived. Relationships that had been cared for enough to still be there, all the way to the end. And that created a kind of invisible support. He wasn't alone, not even when the room was silent, because there was something inside him that had already made peace with what had been lived. Not completely resolved, almost no one reaches that point, but enough to be at rest. And that changes how someone faces the end. In the other room, what came back was absence. The absence of conversations that never happened. The absence of reconciliations that were postponed. The absence of presence throughout a lifetime. And that absence doesn't fade at the end. It intensifies. Because when the body slows down, when the outside world shrinks, what's left is what's inside. And in his case, what was inside wasn't light. It was heavy. Fragmented. Filled with gaps that could no longer be easily repaired. That's when I understood something no one really says out loud. The end isn't the moment where life changes. It's the moment where life reveals itself. It's not where peace suddenly appears. It's where peace, or the lack of it, becomes impossible to hide. Because there are no more distractions. No more rushing. No more I'll deal with it later. There is only what was lived, and what was left behind. And those two patients showed me that, in a way I've never been able to forget. One wasn't at peace because he was dying well. He was at peace because he had been, little by little, facing and tending to his life. The other wasn't in pain only because of the illness. He was in pain because the end arrived before certain essential things had been faced. And that is what truly separates such different endings. After everything was over, I kept walking down that same hallway. Same doors, same scent in the air, same routine that never really stops. But those two rooms stayed with me. Not because of what happened on the final day, but because of what had already been unfolding long before it. The first patient passed. Quietly. There was no dramatic moment, no urgency. It happened during one of those times when the hospital seems to slow down. Early morning hours, dim lights, softer footsteps in the corridor. I walked in to check on him, and I knew the breathing was gone. His body was still, his face calm. But what stayed with me wasn't the moment of death. It was what came after. The family didn't fall apart. There were tears, yes, but they were different. Present. Grounded. full of shared history. They came close, touched him, stayed there for a while, as if they understood that this moment didn't erase what had been lived. There was no rush. No abrupt break. There was continuity. Now. The other room was different. Very different. The end came there too. But it didn't bring the same kind of silence. It brought agitation. Even with medication, his body seemed to resist. Breathing uneven, face tense, like something inside was still being held back. And when it happened, there wasn't that same sense of closure. There was a strange emptiness. The few people who came didn't stay long. They didn't seem to know where to place their hands, their eyes, their words. Some cried, but it felt disconnected, almost lost. And when they left, the room emptied too quickly, but not at peace. I stayed there a little longer than I needed to. Watching. Feeling. Trying to understand how two endings, so close, in time and space, could feel so different in what truly matters. And the answer had been there from the beginning. End doesn't create anything. It only reveals. It reveals what was nurtured, what was avoided, what was said, and most of all, what was left for later. That hallway taught me something I carry with me into every room I enter, every patient I care for. Some people reach the end ready to rest. And others reach the end, wishing for more time. Not because they're afraid of dying, but because, deep down, they feel they haven't finished living what truly mattered. And that is not something you fix on the last day. It's something that's built or lost over an entire lifetime.